So we're going to talk about the Louvre Museum and fine arts in Europe.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Tonight we have a guest, Stephen Snow, who's the artistic director at the Palace Theater in Danbury, Connecticut. Stephen, tell us who you are, where you've been, and how you got to this point in time.
Boy, that's a long story, isn't it?
We got a half hour. Go ahead.
Oh, boy. You know, my background is in writing and filmmaking. I went to Columbia in the writing program. Studied with some great people, Terry Southern being one of them, one of the original writers of Easy Rider. Oh. So I come from sort of a film and stage production background. And then a couple of years ago, I opened a place called Center for New Media and the Arts here in Bethel, Connecticut. Founded that, and we did some really, really terrific programs there over the course of a couple of years. I left there in January and met with Mr. De Silva over at the Palace Theater and took that position on, I don't know, say 3 weeks ago, something like that.
We were talking about France before we actually came on this show. And you were talking about your experiences there and the Louvre Museum, and this is part of your background. It's part of who you are. It's part of your DNA now, I guess. Tell us more about that.
Well, I was older when I went back to school, so I spent a couple of years at Hunter College in New York City, and then transferred over to Columbia. And in '96, I decided I was going to spend a summer in Paris. And it was really, you know, needless to say, it was an amazing experience spending time over there. I wish, as I had mentioned earlier, that I spoke better French. But, you know, that being said, it's really hard to beat Paris as a city. I would say the only place that I love better is my hometown of New York City.
Well, you're lucky, I think, in most foreign countries, because whereas if French people came here, they would be expected to speak English. But we found, and I was there in the 60s twice with my mom, who was a teacher, we went on teachers' tours, was that the French were more amenable to helping us out by speaking English to help us along, rather than expecting us to, one in Paris do as the Parisians do.
Yes, that's true. I mean, to be honest, I was there I really wanted to try to speak the language, but as soon as I would go in and, you know, say, s'il vous plaît, un pain au chocolat, you know, or whatever, I would be asking for, you know, a chocolate croissant, and as soon as I would get, you know, s'il vous plaît out of my mouth, they would start speaking to me in English.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I didn't do too well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a really great time spending, I don't know, 3 or 4 months there.
Yeah.
And had the opportunity to go to Switzerland while I was there, and
isn't that a great country?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Spent a couple of weeks, twice actually, in the Swiss Alps, and got the chance to go over to Italy, to the border, and
to Tyrol.
You know, for a guy, yeah, and actually for a guy who's had no money, I've done a fair amount of traveling. I lived in St. Thomas for 6 months, and been to Greece, and
you can do that stuff on a shoestring. It seems like. I mean, you just have to not want to, you know, want to do the touristy thing. If you're going there to meet people and get to know folks and make new friends, I guess it's not really too expensive. They've got the what do they call the youth hostels, where people can stay for a cheap price, and the Eurail pass isn't too expensive. And
yeah, it's true. I mean, I remember I went with my longtime friend. I've known him since 6th grade. He and I have done a lot of traveling together, and we would stay in Greece. We were staying in $8 a room hotels. As a matter of fact, I went to Havana, Cuba, with him.
Wow.
He's a guy whose father, Phil Masters, his name is John Masters. Phil Masters is the fellow who found Blackbeard the Pirate's flagship off the coast of North Carolina in '96.
Oh, my goodness.
So, yeah, in '99 I went down there and spent a summer crewing on the boat. I got certified to dive. And then I had this notion, I knew a bunch of guys who'd gone to Cuba a couple of times, and they were just, you can sort of imagine what Cuba must be like, all the old cars, and they were telling me it's like walking back into 1956 or something. So I got it in my head that I wanted to, I sort of had this idea for a screenplay.
Yeah.
And I began writing it and realized that you know, I could sit here and I could write this screenplay, but without really experiencing Havana, who knows whether it would work or not.
Sure.
So my friend John, whose father found the Blackbeard ship, through the state of North Carolina, we actually got state permission to travel to Cuba. And we actually ended up in the National Library in Havana doing, you know, because the premise was we were going to go do research on Blackbeard, and indeed we did. We got into the National Library in Havana, and they actually stopped me from taking pictures of these books because the National Library is very close to the government buildings, and so
so there's a little bit of protecting their national interests.
Yeah. So, but it was, I'll tell you that, talking about, you know, being entrenched in the local community. I knew a fellow out of New York who was in the music industry, and he had done a lot of traveling to Cuba and really, really knew some terrific bands down there. So when we got there, we actually spent, you know, 10 days with this local band who was terrific. And, you know, we just we took them out every night, and they showed us the town, you know, in a very different way than you would have, you know, done it had you been just a tourist traveling to Havana. And it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, and certainly the most musical. I mean, I lived in St. Thomas for 6 months when I was 21 or whatever, and that was a very musical place. But you cannot walk the Malecon, which is the longest, you know, seashore promenade in the world. You can't walk that without, you know, going 100 feet and there's another guitarist or someone playing some sort of a beautiful instrument. It's really an exceptional place, and the people are warm and friendly and truly beautiful. So that was a great experience.
And they seem to love Americans, from what I gather, because I attended the Democratic senatorial debate a month ago, and Merrick Alpert talked a lot about normalizing relations with Cuba. And about how, amazingly enough, after 50 some odd years of browbeating the Cubans through politics and through sanctions and whatnot, that the Cubans still seem to love us.
They do. They do. They were about as warm and friendly to us as they could be. You know, they love Americans as people. I don't know that, at least the people that I met weren't a big fan of the policies necessarily.
They can separate the government of the United States from the people of the United States.
Yeah, they really could.
That's always a big plus to be able to. That's tough to do.
Yeah.
Because I remember, my regular co-host, Emily Volpentesta, mentioned that when she was in Italy during on 9/11, and how all of a sudden things turned. And basically, Americans got thrown out of the country because the Italians were afraid that what was being visited on Americans would be visited on them likewise. So it was a very tough time.
Wow, that's a surprise to me. And I was actually in New York and watched the towers fall on that day. So that's actually how I ended up in Connecticut. But that's a long story that we probably shouldn't go into.
You could.
I could.
You could.
But I would find that surprising, just that. You know, my impression, at least, of you know, sort of the European perception of America and Americans after 9/11 was that they had great sympathy for us, at least for a time.
Sure, even the Iranians apparently, you know, were offering to help out.
Well, that's another people, I think, who I've never been to Iran, and I don't expect I will, but I would imagine that. At least, and I dated a gal who was Iranian many years ago, and I think that's probably another people who would probably like us as a people, but may not, you know, I don't know really much about this topic, but I suspect that the people are, you know, just as warm and friendly as the Cubans.
Likewise, seem to be very keen, especially the young population that Iran has now. Now I've got a friend I've just made in Ridgefield who's Iranian. And Nina has that just a certain affinity towards people in general, and you see that sometimes in America, but maybe not as often as you would expect to. You know, maybe we've lost a lot of or maybe we've never gained a lot of the intelligence that old world countries have, countries that are thousands of years old, that have, you know, seen everything, done everything, and their history is filled with all kinds of things, and they kind of, you know, shrug their shoulders a little bit sometimes and let things go by.
Right. I mean, I think there's possibly a tendency as Americans for us to, you know, we're the greatest power in the world, and you know, the universe sort of, and we're big.
Yeah.
So it's sort of everything revolves around us, which is why, you know, at least when I was a child, there was no foreign language requirements as a small boy, and I would have, you know, when I went to Paris, I sure wished that I had that training when I was a youngster.
And we seem to be somewhat caught up in the idea of other people coming to our country and not speaking English, where, you know, if you speak more than one language, it makes you smarter, it makes you a brighter person, because you're not just fluent in a second language, but you're fluent in a second or a third culture, and you're thinking. You can think in other cultures, and it just, well, for me, when I learned a little French and a little Spanish, a little French in high school and a little Spanish in college, it gave me the opportunity to look back at English and to do things like recognizing a lot of verb tenses in English that you never heard about. I had never heard about future past or subjunctive or all these different types of moods that exist in our language, but you never learn that when you're learning English in America. It seems I never learned it until I learned another language.
It's true. When I was at Hunter, I guess it was, I took a class called Greek and Latin Roots of English, which was really about the etymology of the language and whatnot. And even that alone gave me the perspective. But I think you're right too about you know, when I was having to, because at Columbia and actually Hunter, French was a requirement. It wasn't like Brown where you could go and kind of formulate your own.
You had a little more structured core base of classes.
Columbia's big on a classical education, so. But it forced you to sort of get into the mindset, I think, in a certain way of the French, and of course, going there served to sort of solidify and further inform. And as you said, you know, you suggested it just a minute ago, sort of broaden your perspective on the world, because, you know, I was born in Provo, Utah, and that's a whole...
Provo, Utah, my goodness. That's not too far from Salt Lake City, is it?
It's not. It's 15, 20 minutes.
Is that one of the big ski capitals of the world?
Provo Canyon, yeah, it's right up. Well, it's a little further south, I suppose, than Park City and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But my grandparents lived up in northeastern corner of Utah, and so that's a big part of my sort of past as well. The snows, actually, two of the original, my great who knows what, Eliza and Erastus Snow, were two of the first Mormon apostles.
I was going to ask if your background was Mormon.
Yeah, I was baptized Mormon when I was 8. And one of these guys was actually followed the Donner Party through the pass and was one of the first guys to see the Salt Lake Valley, and later became the church president and all that.
Little background for the audience: there was a party that was traveling through the Donner Pass, got caught over a winter, and they did what they had to do to survive, and that included the weak got called out, and they became sustenance, if I can use that word, for the folks that survived, and they did what they had to do. Which of us would not have done the same thing in the same situation? I don't know. It's easy to criticize, but it happens. You know, things like that happen sometimes in life, and we make decisions, and we do what we have to do to keep some of us alive. Tell us about the Mormon religion, because I'm fascinated by it.
You know, honestly, I hardly feel qualified, although on PBS the other night there was a 3-night special, I guess, documentary. I think it's a 6-hour program on it, and I was sort of learning it myself because I got separated from the Mormon Church when I was rather young. But it's got a very interesting and rich history. They started off in upstate New York in what they used to call the burnt-out district of New York. They called it the burnt-out district or the burnt district because religion was on fire, so to speak, and there were many different types of religions popping up. And I think what made Mormonism different than these other religions was that Joseph Smith had this revelation that became the Book of Mormon, which, by the way, I noticed you have in the control room over there. There's a Book of Mormon sitting in there.
I think we have some folks that do some of the shows on Comcast that we probably have a person or two that is of the Mormon faith. We do a lot of talk about religion amongst us between shows, and there's a lot of divergence of shows on Comcast. I think it's important to note that there are a lot of religious shows and a lot of shows that are worthy of watching, because anything that you could learn something from and connect with somebody. And our show, Progressive Soup, a lot of our premise is that we could reach out and carry on a conversation with somebody that doesn't necessarily agree with us on a lot of stuff, but find something in common to talk about. You may know who Billy Michael is.
I sure do.
Sure,
yeah.
Billy. But I had a show with Billy Michael back in, I think it was August or September of last year, and we talked about libertarianism and progressivism. And we found that there were a lot of things that we agreed upon that surprised us a little bit, maybe not too much, because Billy and I have known each other a long time. And he's a very nice person. He doesn't wear his religious, but his political beliefs on his sleeve. He's mainly inclined toward budget controlling, and his position generally is to keep budgets low as a libertarian, to keep budgets as low as humanly possible, and just get the basic services out there. Whereas a progressive, I think the government has the ability to do great things and can invest money better than individuals can. So we found some areas of agreement, some areas of disagreement on that. Talked about things as diverse as abortion, and I felt that libertarians who believe that government should not interfere in people's lives probably should tend to be more pro-choice, more in favor of women making their own decisions. But their leader, Ron Paul, and I had another young man, Kyle Scheich, who was a libertarian on, talked about it because he became very enamored of Ron Paul during the 2008 election. But back about the Mormon religion, what do you remember about it, and what part of it has stuck with you?
Probably values, although I don't know that that's so much from the Mormon religion as from spending time, certainly my mother, and I spent a fair amount of time working a farm, a real working farm.
Wow.
My grandfather in northeastern Utah. We're talking about, bull riding and chickens and turkeys and, a 400-pound boar that I used to ride and all sorts of stuff.
Wow, that's got to be interesting.
So I think, for the most part, at least in my experience, there's a very solid value system.
I've sensed that from people that I've spoken to who are Mormons, that they're like everybody else, family values are very important. Now, how's the family structured in the Mormon Church generally? I mean, do you have extended families living close by one another and staying close to one another? Again, I don't really feel qualified to talk too much about the Mormon faith, but I can say that certainly in my limited experience, if you're born in Utah, I think my mother was a big exception. She went from being in Utah to being an actress in New York City, or an actor, as they say these days. Yes, absolutely.
But the point that you made earlier about that on this particular show people can come together regardless of what your opinion or your outlook on a particular subject is. One of the things that I think, one of the things about art, art does that same thing. In other words, it can bring together everybody, and it doesn't matter where you're from, what country you're from, what political or religious outlook or perspective that you have. If people come to, for example, the Palace Theater, and they come to have a shared experience in the arts, I think it can inform, not just entertain, but really inform one's inner life and help a person grow. And I think this is a huge topic across the country, but arts education, as you well know, has suffered enormously in this day and age, and that's one of the things that we're going to try to bring back to the community over there. So,
well, the higher-minded subjects, I've always felt the higher-minded subjects were really, in fact, what schools should teach, because if you teach a child something that fires their imagination, they'll figure out a way on their own to learn how to do the basics. If they realize, if they're learning some particular science, some area of science, and they realize that, oh, well, in order to do this, I better learn how to do basic math, that'll be what drives them to learn to do basic math.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, at least, I may have I don't know if it's probably not unique, but, and maybe it's even a little bit cliche, but I am an absolute believer that if you decide to do something, if you put your mind to it, and you just stay with it, you can do it. When I found, for example, the Center for New Media and the Arts, that space, when I walked in there and saw it for the first time, you couldn't even see out the windows. Now, you've seen the space. It's a 2,400 square foot, beautiful space with 15-foot ceilings, 19 9-foot windows. And I walked in there, and you couldn't see out the windows because it was a photography studio for 30 years, and there were backdrops, these 2x4 structures blocking the windows with photography backdrops, and the place was just scattered, a mess. The floor needed sanding, and we went in there, and literally as soon as I saw it, we really had no intention of opening sort of a center for the arts or a performance space or an art gallery, which all of those it became, as you know. But when I saw this space, I looked at it and I said, this could be something truly extraordinary. And it reminded me of what you might have seen in the meatpacking district of New York 25 years ago, or Brooklyn.
Absolutely.
And, and I called my then business partner and I said, you really need to come down here and just take a look at this. And here's the thought, here's the idea behind this. Because we were sort of a little mom and pop video production company at the time. And just this vision, sort of just took place, if you will. And determination is the only thing that made that place. And
it had to reach out. It had to be a building that reached out and just captured your heart and your imagination.
It did, and my love of arts is what drove that effort. And of course, hopefully that's why I got hired over at the Palace, is to really sort of bring the arts in all disciplines to the Palace Theater, because we're going to be doing very similar things, although on a larger scale, and frankly a more the talent caliber, if you will, is going to be just top notch over there.
Yeah, New Center Media of the Arts was more of a cauldron, a breeding ground of beginning artists, folks that were still in their formative stages. You'll get a little bit more, maybe a little bit more polished performers. They'll hopefully still have that same enthusiasm as they had when they were in that formative stage.
Absolutely, and we do want to have the community and local artists to be part of the experience at the Palace, and we want to invite the community in for all types of different arts, and to volunteer and to be a part of it. So we'll do, spoken word poetry, and we'll do comedy. We'll do play performances, probably opera. Obviously, we'll have live music as well, dance. And then we'll be doing some arts education stuff. And I think we decided probably in November we're going to have a week-long workshop with kids, and at the end of it, they're going to perform Annie. One of the fun things that we're going to do there probably is we're going to have on Halloween night we'll have the Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight, and we'll have performers in the aisles.
Oh my God, that's always a great one. I mean, that's been what 25 years now, almost 30 years that's been out.
Yeah,
and it still has that essence that it's crossed at least one generation.
Yes. And it's fantastic. I mean, and the performers will be from. We're working pretty closely with Alicia Dempster, who is I believe the executive director of Stage Repertory Company out of Danbury, and they're terrific people, great to work with. We'll be doing a lot of plays with them in the future. So there's a lot going on, and it's still I've only been at this for a few weeks, but we've already got quite a lot on the docket, as it were, coming up.
I have a feeling it's going to happen very quickly there.
Yeah. Well, the community needs it. The community needs it, and to be honest with you, I feel very fortunate to be working with Joe Da Silva and for him, because he's really committed. You know, he's told me a couple of times that you know, he will not quit until he can make this into a place that the community can really truly enjoy. And part of the mission is almost to you know, what I would like to see over there is that the community in the surrounding area comes to know that the Palace is really there for them, that they come to know our schedule as well as they know, you know, what's playing at the local Cineplex,
oh, of course, yeah.
or what's, you know, when their favorite baseball team is on television. That they're going to be coming in and they're going to, you know, hopefully get a little bit more for a little less money, kind of thing, and just have a really terrific experience. And we already have some fantastic, you know, artists lined up. So
there's a little theater in Santa Barbara, California that's very much like that, and it seems like it tends to gel the entire community. People know that they've got a place where they can go, and maybe just even drop into the theater to show when they have guests from out of town and say, this is my theater.
Yes,
I have a vested interest in this through either being a participant or occasionally coming to see a performing arts something going on there, and it really becomes almost like another friend to individuals.
Exactly. I think it can galvanize a community, and I know, you know, just that the city of Danbury itself sort of looks to the Palace as sort of a cornerstone or the jewel of the, you know, the revitalization effort of Main Street Danbury.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we really, really do invite people to experience it, because it's, you know, the theater was built in 1928 as a 2,000-seat venue.
So it's just pre-Depression.
Yeah.
Kind of like just the cusp of the Depression.
Right. I mean, I believe Jimmy Durante played there, Louis Armstrong, all sorts of people. A friend of mine was telling me the other day that he saw a bunch of, you know, terrific bands there in the 60s and the 70s. But in the 1975, I believe, it was split into a triplex movie house. So the 1,000 seats that were downstairs was cut in. You know, they put a wall in,
yeah,
made that into 2 movie theaters, and the upstairs was left as a 1,000-seat theater.
Yeah.
So it was a triplex, but you know, they were trying to compete with these big cineplexes.
We're going to wrap it up right there. We're going to come back after we take a short break. We're going to do another show. Stephen Snow, new artistic director of the Palace Theater in Danbury, and a man that's going to be involved in bringing Danbury back to its greatness.
Let's hope so.
See you in a couple of minutes. Thanks very much. This is Progressive Soup.